Good evening, and thank you for joining me for study tonight. We will be studying the Yoga Sutras third pada. The first pada is the Dharma, universal law, and the intellectual philosophy and knowledge that you need to understand before you step into the second and third pada. The second pada is practice, which goes hand in hand with the first pada, the yin, the yang. In the first pada, they talk about the first 5 limbs of yoga, your yamas, niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara. In the third pada, we get into the top 3 limbs of yoga, which is dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. If you don't know the Sanskrit, the yamas and niyamas are the morals and the self-observances. The asana is the body awareness. So the asana induces physical training. And physical training at a monastic level takes anywhere from 1 year to 8 years, and if the body's feeble when you begin, up to even 12 years or 15 years. But if you come in, you're somewhat healthy, and you stick to your training and you eat right, it can take 1 year to 3 years, usually 3. After that, the body's trained. While you're physically training, you're also strengthening the mind, because that mind, so body mind. The fourth limb, pranayama, means breath control. It means learning how to charge up your internal energy, prana, and it's also breath awareness. So your asana is supposed to be practiced to a high level to where you can sit strong, comfortable, and aware. These 3 qualities, but you have to keep your consciousness in your body, all right? Then comes the pranayama, which is the breath control. Then after the pranayama comes pratyahara. Pratya means food. Pratyahara means withdrawing the senses inwards towards the soul instead of outwards towards the earthly things, towards earthly sensual pleasures. That's pratyahara. Now, in the third pada, they start off with the 6th limb, which is concentration. Then they explain what meditation is, and then right into samadhi. Without further ado, let's begin. The translation that you're going to be seeing here is my translation. My first book. I was lucky and blessed enough to sacrifice 10 months of my life studying and writing the book, but I had studied it for about 15 years before that. And my questions when I started studying it was, because I was very interested in all religions, what is this text about? Why should I study this text? Does this text go against Christianity? These were the types of questions that I had, but I was always very curious. So now, after having mastered the text, I can say it's just an absolute phenomenal text. The reason why I do this is because this is really the only way that you could possibly help humankind, is by teaching the texts, really, but this text especially. So here we go. Sutra 3.1. Thanks so much for joining, guys. Welcome. Fixing your consciousness on one point is concentration. So we've all heard concentration, but there's so many different definitions out there. This is why the Yoga Sutras is such a superb text. It says right here, fixing your consciousness on one point is concentration. I give 3 translations for this. Dharana is the focus of the inner eye on a particular point in time and space, or one idea or object. Third translation, holding the mind on one place, object, or idea is dharana, which is concentration, the 6th limb. Now they get right into the 7th limb. 3.2, a steady continuous flow of attention directed towards a single point or object is meditation. So there you go. That's what meditation is. Let me give all 3 translations. Meditation is when the inner eye remains focused on one thing continuously without interruption. Dhyana, Sanskrit for meditation, is when concentration flows without interruption. So now, if you focus on this point, and you focus your attention just on this point for a long period of time, that's meditation. But also what people need to know what meditation is, when you're discerning, when you're contemplating, when you're introspecting, that is also meditation. Both of them focus on the frontal lobe of the brain. 3.3. When the object that appears in the eye shines forth in truth and without conceptual judgment, this is samadhi. So you're fully absorbed when the object that you're meditating upon appears in your third eye without any type of conceptualization about it. You're just seeing the object for exactly what it is. So when you do the philosophy, you're learning higher knowledge. You're increasing your intelligence. You're working on the frontal lobe. But when you get into the samadhi states, you have to have the ability to still the mind. That usually takes effort for a lot of people. Sutra 3.4. When concentration, meditation, and oneness are focused upon one thing, this is called samyama. So when you practice all of the top 3 limbs together, they have a name for it, samyama. Well, you're practicing each of the 8 limbs and then making all the 8 limbs one. And when you master all 8 limbs, then you reach Dharma Mega Samadhi, is what they call it in this text. The ultimate goal. Omniscience, omnipresence, and the cloud of virtuous morality and perfection that surrounds you. So you actually go through a physical change when you do this. The light of awareness and insight come to fruition when one masters samyama. So as soon as you master samyama, your insight becomes perfected. When your insight is perfected, you can know anything about anything because it's obvious. It's right in front of you. You're no longer projecting your own biases on what you see or what you focus your mind upon. And yes, this definitely can lead into astral viewing or distance viewing. Absolutely. Astral viewing for a yogi is nothing. For a mastered yogi, it's easy. 3.6. The practice of samyama is mastered by progressive stages. Dharana, dhyana, and samadhi are more subtle than yama, niyama, asana, and pranayama. So the way that yoga is taught, you go from first they teach the moral and ethical codes first. Then it goes physical with asana, then more subtle with breath work, then more subtle with learning your own soul and spirit, then more subtle with being able to concentrate, then more subtle with being able to meditate, and then the most subtle with samadhi. So they're covering all the realms from the physical into the spiritual realm, and you need to be conscious on all levels at the same time. So it takes training. 3.8. Nirbija Samadhi is even more subtle than samyama. So here again, guys, if you want to know your Sanskrit, it's one of the definitely necessary things that you have to know about Sanskrit. Nirvana, nirbija, nidra, nirodha. Okay, all these words start with nir. It's like the negate in front of it. So nirbija means without seed, samadhi. So when you hear the text right now, these words, they're going to bring you to an elevated level. Studying any spiritual text elevates your level. But nirbija samadhi is when there's no longer, you're not leaning on any spiritual text anymore. You're not leaning on anything anymore. There's absolutely zero attachment in the soul. You've completely purified all your fetters, mastered morality, mastered concentration, and attained oneness. That's nirbija samadhi. But there's a higher level than that. The highest level is Dharma Mega Samadhi, and they get to that in the end of the 4th pada. 3.9. Studying the silent movements between rising and falling subliminal impressions transforms the consciousness towards restraint. So now this is why you have to recite the sutras, because each sutra is important. There's 196 sutras, and you need to know all of them. You really only need to know about 175 of them, because some of them you don't really need to know. But these sutras, you have to know every one. If you're missing one of the sutras, you'll be missing a piece of information that you need in order to complete the text. So you have to introspect the silent movements between your thoughts. 3.10. Restraining the rising impressions gives birth to an undisturbed flow of tranquility. I love when I hit those places of inner peace. 3.11. When you weaken scattered attention and increase one-pointed attention, you begin transformation towards samadhi. 3.12. One-pointed consciousness emerges when rising and falling thought processes are in balance. Constant vigilant awareness that goes from one-pointed awareness to no-pointed attentiveness is ekagrata parinama. 3.13. By mastery of nirodha, samadhi, and ekagrata, the spiritual practitioner undergoes a metamorphosis that affects the elements, organs, senses, body, and mind, bringing one to a stable conscious state. So this is what I'm telling you. There's an actual physical and energetic change that occurs when you go into these states. And when you go into these states, there's no pain. Eventually, there's no more pain. You eliminate all the causes of death. There's no more causes of an early death. It's possible, even if you have genetic defects from your parents, it's possible to overcome them if you attain these states. 3.13. I'll read the second translation. Why not? During the three phases described in the Sutras 3.9 through 3.12, one cultures consciousness and transforms it from potential state, dharma, to its next level of refinement, laksana, and then to its zenith, avasta. When one is successful in this venture, a transformation of the elements, senses, and mind takes place. This gives birth to a steady state of consciousness. I love how the Buddha describes it. He says, a monk who has mastered the Dharma comes to the permanent state, which can no longer change. That's how the Buddha describes it. But the Buddha doesn't say in the Dhammapada, maybe he says it in one of the texts. I haven't read all the Buddha's texts, but he doesn't say in the Dhammapada, he doesn't explain the energetic and physical aspect of it like the Yoga Sutras does. The Yoga Sutras flat out explains the physical changes that you go through. 3.14, the background essence stays the same in all states. Second translation, the substrata is what continues to exist and maintain its characteristics through rising, manifest, and subsiding states. So Buddha says it's better to live one day watching the rising and falling of phenomena than to never have lived at all. So basically you're sitting there, you're watching the phenomena rise and you're watching the phenomena fall. But the substrata remains the same. Which brings us to the next sutra. The difference in the order of events creates different transformations in mind and objects. So it depends on how you respond to the situation. Each situation is used to purify the soul and step up your spiritual level. Every situation and circumstance. That's why you have to slow down sometimes, because the thoughts happen so fast, the circumstances happen so fast. We're busy living, we're busy working. Each thought is so important because that shapes your karma and your future, and your thoughts go on forever. I believe the Buddha calls it alama, but it's called your mental continuum. Your mental continuum just goes on and on and on. To change one mental habit, for some people, they can't even do that. So to change all your mental habits that are defiled into completely and totally non-defiled mental habits, by samyama on the three kinds of mental transformations, knowledge of the past and the future can be seen in the inner eye. So what are they saying here? When you meditate on the beginning, the middle, and the end of all of the rising states, whatever you look at, you can see where it came from and where it's going to end up. You can see the beginning and the end. In the fourth pada, they say that most people can only see the transformations at the end of the transformations. So most people only see the transformation at the end of it. But when you master samyama, you don't just see the end anymore. You see both ends of the spectrum, you see? 3.17, a word, its meaning, and the idea behind it often become confused. By samyama on the sound produced by any being, knowledge of its meaning is obtained. 3.18, through direct perception of mental impressions, one gauges knowledge of his past lives. So there you go. Do you want to know how to remember your past lives? You just sit there, let go of all your greed, and pay attention to the mental impressions. Eventually, they bubble up. I think the Buddha took 40 days. Right? 3.19, by samyama on the distinguishing signs of other bodies, knowledge of their mental images are known, so you can read people's body language. 3.20, a yogi who has mastered samyama is able to see beyond the physical and into the more subtle aspect of objects and ideas focused upon. That's what we were saying before. You gain insight to anything you look at. You just know. You look at it, you can feel it. You just see it, you feel it, you just know. It's a knowing. Because when you're mastering your intuition, your own personal biases will often get in the way. So you just pay attention to what pops up and let it go. And over time, you learn this intuition was clouded with delusion. This intuition was clouded with fear. This intuition was clouded with this. But when your real intuitions come up, you start to learn this intuition was real and it happened. This intuition was real, it was happened. And you study the mental states that you're in when your intuition's on. As soon as the mind as soon as you lose clarity, your intuition is garbage. 3.21, by samyama on the body's energetic realms, one gains the ability to intercept the light before it reaches the eyes of onlookers, thus making oneself invisible. So these are some of the sutras that I'm saying aren't necessary because they're getting into the spiritual powers and they're not necessary for you to reach enlightenment, but I guess they are kind of cool. 3.22, through samyama on the subtle realms, one can manipulate the flow of energies perceived by the senses. 3.23, the effects of actions are immediately manifesting or slowly manifesting. By samyama on your actions, you will know what fruits they will bear. You will learn the exact time of your death. So here, they would call this skillful action. When you get to this state of wisdom, you know what the results of your actions are going to be, so you act skillfully as to not produce any more bad karma for yourself. 324. The more restraint you have, the better your skillful action will be. By perfecting kindness and virtue towards all beings, one gains moral and emotional strength. 325. When one does samyama on a creature and the qualities it possesses, one acquires that creature's abilities. 326. By viewing things in the light of his inner eye, the yogi can know anything about whatever he does samyama upon. 327. One gains knowledge of the solar system through samyama on the sun. Again, not necessary. Through samyama on the moon, one learns the stars and constellations. Okay, pretty cool, but nowadays we got science. 329. By samyama on the pole star, one knows the course of destiny. That's pretty interesting. 330. By samyama on the navel, you acquire knowledge of the inner workings of the body. This is absolutely important. And in Proverbs in the Bible, it says, when you're kind-hearted, it's food to thy navel, and I forget, food to the marrow. But the Bible mentions the navel as well. So you're supposed to meditate on the navel. It's the center of all the energy channels. They call it the kanda. 331. By samyama on the pit of the throat, one is able to overcome hunger and thirst. So there you go. If you're hungry when you're meditating, focus on the pit of the throat. 332. One can attain motionlessness in a meditative posture by samyama on the space 1 inch down and 1/2 inch inside from where the two collarbones connect to the breastplate. This is called the Karma Nadi. The Karma Nadi is somewhat secretive. It took a lot of research to find out what it was and where it was, and I had to figure it out. There was no place that told me where the Karma Nadi was. I had to gather all the information about the Karma Nadi that was available and then figure it out for myself. So this is like a privilege to know where the Karma Nadi is. 333. Through samyama on the light at the crown of the head, one attains holy vision. This one's extremely important. 334. All knowledge and powers dawn by themselves, and one achieves clarity through a life of purity. So if you purify all of your defilements, I like how the Buddha says effluence. If you purify your effluence, all these knowledge and powers will dawn by themselves. One gains knowledge on the nature of the mind and the qualities of consciousness by samyama on the heart. Very important sutra. 336. Through samyama practice, one is able to differentiate between intelligence and the soul. Again, very important sutra. 337. Through the spiritual perception that arises, the yogi acquires divine superphysical seeing, hearing, smelling, taste, touch, feeling, and knowing. So that's the old school translation. The new language translation. When this level is reached, one gains clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsalience, clairgustance, clairtangency, clairsentience, and claircognizance, the higher senses. 338. In worldly life, these powers are useful, but they are hindrances to spiritual enlightenment. After contemplating the spiritual powers and contemplating the sutras, when you're going about your day, if you have pure intentions and a pure heart, you can use your spiritual gifts to get through skillfully without causing any problems. If you start overusing them for worldly gain, it can lead to big problems. So your best bet is to do actions that are harmless during the day, and then at night, do your types of meditations. Because this book is about transcendence. Don't get caught up in spiritual powers and worldly stuff. 339. When you are free from earthly attachments and have a full understanding of the workings of the brain, it is possible to will your consciousness into another's body. I don't do that because it affects free will. 340. One may levitate over water, swamps, and thorns through mastery over the upward air current. 341. Radiant light and glowing energy comes to surround the body when mastery over the equalizing vital air current, samana vayu found in the navel, is achieved. 342. Clairaudience is mastered by samyama on the correlation between space and sound. 343. One becomes as light as a cotton fiber and is able to travel through space by samyama on the relationship of the body and ether. So here they're telling you how to fly, how to levitate, and how to fly. The one before this, they tell you how to levitate. In this one, they're telling you if you want to fly, this is how you do it. I don't know. I never met anybody who could fly, but I heard people who've heard of monks that could fly, or saw monks that could fly. It's definitely possible. Either way, unless it comes naturally to you for some reason, usually the yogis that can do it dedicate years and years and years of practicing concentration in this practice. If you want to dedicate your life to it, you can do it. They sit there all day and practice concentration and trying to levitate for years and years and years. 344. The veil covering illuminated wisdom is destroyed by samyama on the correlation of the consciousness inside and outside the body. Here we go. This is one of the more important sutras. The veil covering illuminated wisdom is destroyed by samyama on the correlation of the consciousness inside the body and outside the body. So when you're meditating, you want to meditate on what's happening inside of you and what's happening around you. And the way that this is taught in Buddhism is the Buddha would teach anapanasati first, which is mindfulness of breath, which brings the consciousness here, opens up the frontal brain. And then after he would teach anapanasati, he would teach satipana. Satipana is paying attention to all the consciousness. So those two Buddhist meditations would cover Sutra 344. Thanks for joining. Welcome. Sutra 345. By samyama on the elements, their mass, gross form, subtle form, interrelationship, and functions, mastery over them is gained. 346. Mastery of the 5 elements brings perfection of the body and leads to extraordinary powers. These powers include the ability to make oneself small and to resist outside forces. The resisting outside forces is pretty simple. Making oneself small. Yeah. 347. Beauty of form, grace, strength, compactness, and the qualities of a diamond constitute bodily perfection. 348. Mastery over the sense organs is attained through samyama on the interrelationship of sense perception, objects perceived, and the ego, which I have here, sense of I consciousness. 349. Welcome. Thanks for studying with me. I appreciate it. By mastery over the senses of perception, the speed of one's body, senses, and mind match the speed of the soul, and the yogi gains control over the fundamental forces of physical existence. 350. Only one who knows the difference between the intellect and the soul attains ultimate knowledge of all existence and manifestations. So only people who know the difference between the intellect and the soul attain omniscience. Say it, omniscience, omniscience, omniscience. If you want to know something, the first thing you have to know is what it means. If you're not exposed to it, how are you going to know it? They don't say omniscience in everything that you watch. Like, if you don't put it into your mind, how are you going to know? You have to choose to put this stuff into your mind. Just hearing the word omniscience is going to take your intellect to a higher level. The intellect has to be completely perfected. The earthly stuff has to be completely perfected. The intellect has to be completely perfected. The soul has to be completely perfected. 351. When the seeds of bondage have been destroyed and the yogi renounces these powers, he may achieve eternal emancipation. 352. The yogi should not take pleasure if contacted by a celestial being because it may create unwanted attachments. So if you're approached by an angel or a deity, or you have angelic powers or angelic, you can hear the angels, angelic clairvoyance, or you can hear deities, don't brag about it and don't get over happy about it because it'll bring you into more attachments. 353. Well, when you're on that frequency and you're paying attention to the crown chakra, 353. The yogi gains wisdom free from the limitations of time and space by practicing samyama on one moment, the continuous flow of moments. How important is this sutra? 354. When this wisdom dawns, the yogi is able to see everything about whatever he does samyama upon. This includes seeing both ends of the spectrum of duality, positive and negatives, pleasures and pains, the beginning and the end of whatever is in the mind's eye. it's a metaphor of, if you have a quarter, this side's heads, this side's tails. But if you spin it on the table and look at it, you can see the heads and the tails. You see? So instead of only seeing the end of the transformation and then emotionally reacting to it, when it appears in your mind's eye, you can see the cause of it, the ending of it, the positives about it, the negatives about it, and the pleasures and the pains that you get when you look at it. So the Buddha would call this perfect vision. And the Buddha says the Eightfold Path is the only path to perfect vision. The eight limbs of yoga are as well. Definitely. There's no uncertainty in my mind. 355. True wisdom is intuitive and liberating. It simultaneously comprehends all there is to know about all subjects and objects. 356. When the intelligence becomes as pure as the soul, the yogi has reached liberation, kaivalya. And that's the last sutra for the third sutra. So I appreciate the person who stayed with me through the whole study. So if you want to leave a comment or anything like that, the study will continue. I appreciate you coming. We have Dhammapada study at 8, and we will continue to study the sutras. If for some reason you're seeing this recorded, continue your study of the sutras, because you have to know the sutras front and back, and you also have to embody the essence of each sutra. And if you're hearing one sutra and going, what is this? That's how it starts. Like these sutras, they're not just something easy to put into your head. They're very intelligent and they're very potent lines of information. You have to use your brain to understand them. You have to practice them. Just to grasp them, it takes time. To know every single one of them, forward and backwards, you have to recite them over and over again. And if you're filling your head with the sutras, you'll get it. So when you have a choice of what to fill your head with, it's important, because a lot of times you don't have a choice, right? You're working, you're taking care of the kids, you're doing this, you're eating, you're sleeping, okay? When you have a choice of what to put into your mind, you have to choose to put these sutras into your mind until you can recite the whole text. If you're completely and totally happy chasing earthly things and you feel contented with that, the sutras aren't for you. Spiritual enlightenment isn't for you. The spiritual life is not for you. If you finally come to the realization that all the things that you're finding pleasure in are tinged with pain and unhappiness, and you've had enough of experiencing the same event over and over and over again, and boredom and anger and suffering, then the study of the sutras and spiritual enlightenment is for you. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Be well.